I want you dead. Judge shocks court by sentencing 12-year-old girl to death for killing her mother. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The courtroom was silent, not the kind of silence that feels peaceful. This was heavy, suffocating. Every breath seemed too loud. Every movement felt wrong. At the center of it all sat a 12-year-old girl. Her name was Alice Whitmore. She wore a pale blue sweater, too big for her small frame. Her hands were cuffed in front of her, resting on the wooden table like she was waiting. For dinner, not a verdict. Her dark hair was pulled back into a neat ponytail. Her face, calm, too calm. The judge, a stern man in his 60s with deep lines around his mouth, adjusted his glasses and looked down at the paper in front of him. His voice was flat, rehearsed. Alice Marie Whitmore, you have been found guilty of first-degree murder in the death of your mother, Ellen Whitmore. This court sentences you to death by lethal injection. A gasp rippled through the room. Someone in the back row sobbed. A reporter's pen dropped to the floor with a sharp clatter. But Alice didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't even blink. She just sat there staring straight ahead, her expression unreadable. Was it shock? Acceptance? Or something else entirely? The bailiff stepped forward and placed a hand on her shoulder. She stood without resistance, her cuffed hands still, folded neatly in front of her. As they led her toward the side door, she turned her head, just slightly, and looked back at the gallery. Her eyes swept over the crowd, journalists, strangers, a few teachers from her school. And then, for just a moment, her gaze landed on someone in the third row, a woman with short gray hair and a worn leather jacket. She wasn't crying, she wasn't writing, she was just watching. Their eyes met, and then Alice smiled. Not a big smile, not a cruel one, just the faintest curl at the corner of her mouth, like she knew something no one else did. Then she was gone. The heavy door closed behind her with a metallic thud, and the courtroom erupted. Reporters rushed toward the exit. Family members collapsed into each other's arms. The judge banged his gavel, trying to restore order, but it was useless. Outside, news vans lined the street. Headlines were already being written. 12-year-old girl sentenced to death for mother's murder. The coldest child in America. Monster or victim? The Alice Whitmore case. But no one was asking the right question. No one was asking why a 12-year-old girl would kill her own mother, meticulously, carefully, without leaving a single mistake. No one except the woman in the leather jacket. Her name was Grace Lehman, and she hadn't been in that courtroom by accident. Because 3 months earlier, before the trial, before the arrest, before the night Ellen Whitmore died in her own bathtub, Grace had been investigating something else entirely. Something that led straight to that house on Maple Street. Something that made her believe Alice Whitmore wasn't a killer. She was a victim, and the real monster, still walking free. 3 months earlier, Maple Street looked like it belonged in a magazine. Perfectly trimmed hedges, white picket fences, American flags hanging from front porches. The kind of neighborhood where everyone knew each other's names and nobody locked their doors. Number 47 was no different. A 2-story colonial with dark green shutters and a stone pathway leading to the front door. In the spring, the garden bloomed with tulips. In the fall, pumpkins lined the steps. It was picture perfect. Ellen Whitmore had lived there for 9 years. She was a criminal defense attorney, one of the best in Connecticut. Sharp, calculated, never lost a case she believed in. People respected her. Some feared her. She had a reputation for being cold in the courtroom, but fair. At home, she was a single mother. Alice's father had left when she was 3. No one really talked about him. Ellen didn't like to. When asked, she'd say something vague like, he wasn't ready to be a parent, and change the subject. So it was just the two of them, mother and daughter, living in that beautiful house on Maple Street. But if you looked closer, if you really paid attention, you'd notice things. Like how Alice never had friends over, or how Ellen's car was always in the driveway even On weekends because she worked from home most of the time. Watching, or how Alice walked to school every morning with her head down, earbuds in, never talking to anyone. Her teachers described her as quiet, polite, incredibly smart, but distant. One teacher, Mrs. Brennan, had said in an interview after the arrest, "Alice was always alone. I thought maybe she was just shy, but now, I wonder if she was scared." Scared of what? That was the question no one had answered yet. On the outside, Ellen Whitmore was the perfect mother. She attended every parent-teacher conference. She made sure Alice had everything she needed. She even homeschooled her for 2 years during middle school, saying the public system wasn't challenging enough. But inside that house, behind closed doors, there were no family photos on the walls, no laughter, no warmth, just rules. Alice had a schedule. Wake up at 6 a.m., breakfast at 6:30, study from 7 now to 3 gown, dinner at 6 p.m., bed by 9 now. No exceptions. Ellen monitored everything. What Alice ate, what she read, who she talked to online. Though she rarely did. Neighbors would later say they never heard them argue, never heard Alice cry or Ellen yell. It was always quiet, too quiet. One neighbor, Mr. Dalton, remembered something strange. He'd been mowing his lawn one Saturday afternoon when he saw Alice sitting on the porch steps, staring at nothing. He waved. She didn't wave back. He thought maybe she hadn't seen him, but then Ellen appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, watching. She didn't say anything, just stood there, and after a moment Alice got up and went inside. It felt off, Mr. Dalton said later, like the kid wasn't allowed to just be a kid, you know? But no one reported anything, no one called child services. Because Ellen Whitmore was respectable, successful, and Alice. She never complained, until the night of April 14th, the night Ellen Whitmore died, and the night everything changed. April 14th started like any other day. Ellen left for the courthouse at 7 a.m. She had a client meeting, something about an appeal. Alice stayed home. She was supposed to be studying for an exam, but instead she sat in her room with the door closed, staring at her laptop screen. At 3:47 p.m., Ellen came home. She parked in the driveway, grabbed her briefcase, and walked inside. The door clicked shut behind her. That was the last time anyone saw her alive. At 9:23 p.m., a 911 call came in. The voice on the line was calm, almost unnervingly so. "My mom isn't breathing." The operator asked her name. She said, "Alice Whitmore." "How old are you, sweetheart?" 12. "Okay, Alice, where is your mom right now?" "In the bathtub." There was a pause. "Is she in the water?" "Yes." "Alice, I need you to pull her out if you can. Can you do that?" "No." "Why not?" "Because she's already dead." Paramedics arrived 6 minutes later. They found Ellen Whitmore submerged in the bathtub, fully clothed. The water was cold. Her eyes were open. At first it looked like an accident. Maybe she slipped. Maybe she had a seizure. But then, the lead paramedic noticed something. Bruises on her wrists. Faint, but there. And the bathroom door? Locked from the outside. Alice was sitting on the couch when the police arrived. She didn't cry, didn't panic. She just sat there, hands folded in her lap, staring at the wall. Detective Raymond Holt was the first to question her. "Alice, can you tell me what happened tonight?" She looked at him with those big, dark eyes. "I don't know. I was in my room." "Did you hear anything? A fall? A scream?" "No." "When did you realize something was wrong?" "When I went to check on her, she didn't come out for dinner." "And the bathroom door was locked?" She nodded. "How did you get in?" "I used the key. From the hallway closet." Holt wrote that down. Then he asked the question that would change everything. "Alice, did you and your mom fight today?" She hesitated, just for a second. "No." But Holt didn't believe her. 2 days later, forensics came back. Ellen Whitmore had drowned, but not accidentally. Someone had held her down. The bruises on her wrists matched small hands, and then they found the note. It was tucked inside Alice's notebook, written in her handwriting, dated 3 days before Ellen died. 4 words. I want you dead. That was all it took. Alice Whitmore was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. She didn't resist, didn't ask for a lawyer, didn't say a word. At the station, she sat in the interrogation room for 2 hours, silent while detectives tried to break her. Finally, Detective Holt leaned forward and asked, "Why did you do it, Alice?" She looked up at him, and for the first time she spoke. Because she deserved it. The room went cold. Holt sat back in his chair, stunned. What did she do to you? Alice didn't answer. She just looked down at her hands and whispered, "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." And that was the last thing she said. For weeks. The media exploded. Headlines screamed. The trial was fast-tracked. But 12-year-old girl who planned her mother's murder? It was the story of the year. But one person wasn't buying it. Grace Lehman sat in her apartment, watching the news coverage, and something didn't sit right. The way Alice looked in those courtroom photos. The way she never defended herself. The way everyone called her a monster, but no one asked why. Grace had seen cases like this before. She knew what real evil looked like. And this? This wasn't it. So she made a decision. She was going to find out what really happened in that house on Maple Street, even if it destroyed her. Grace Lehman hadn't been inside a police station in 2 years, not since the day she turned in her badge. She'd been a detective for nearly 15 years, homicide mostly. She was good at it, too good, some said. She had a way of seeing through lies, of finding the truth buried under layers of misdirection. But that same instinct got her in trouble. 3 years ago, she'd been working a case. A wealthy businessman accused of killing his wife. Open and shut, everyone said. The evidence was solid. The man confessed. But Grace didn't believe him. She kept digging. Found inconsistencies, found witnesses who'd been ignored. Found proof that someone else had been in that house the night the woman died. Her captain told her to drop it. The case was closed. The department had already moved on. She didn't listen, so they forced her out. Insubordination, they called it. Obsessive behavior. They made it. Sound like she was unstable. She lost her job, her reputation, her purpose. For 2 years, she did nothing. Drank too much coffee, watched too much TV, tried to convince herself she didn't care anymore. But then she saw Alice Whitmore on the news. That face, those eyes, that eerie calm. Everyone else saw a monster. Grace saw something different. She saw a child who had given up. The day after the sentencing, Grace went to the courthouse. She needed to see the case files, but she knew they wouldn't let her in. Not officially. So she called in a favor. Marcus Chen had been her partner back in the day. He was still with the department, still working homicide. He owed her. She'd saved his career once when he screwed up a chain of custody. He never forgot it. They met at a diner on the edge of town. Marcus slid into the booth across from her, looking uncomfortable. "You know I can't give you access to an active case, Grace. It's not active anymore." She was sentenced. Still, it's sealed. Juvenile records. Grace leaned forward. "Marcus, that little girl is sitting in a cell right now waiting to die, and nobody's asking the right questions. Maybe because there's nothing to ask." She confessed. Did she, or did she just stop fighting? Marcus sighed. He pulled a manila folder from his bag and set it on the table. "I didn't give you this, understand?" Grace nodded. He stood up, dropped a 20 on the table, and walked out without another word. Grace opened the folder. Inside were crime scene photos. Ellen Whitmore's body in the bathtub. The locked door, the bruises on her wrists. Then the note. "I want you dead." But as Grace read through the police reports, something jumped out at her. The timeline didn't add up. According to the coroner, Ellen had died between 2 and 8 p.m. But Alice's 911 call didn't come in until 9:23 p.m., an hour and a half. What had Alice been doing during that time? Grace flipped through more pages. Witness statements, neighbors, teachers, a school counselor. One name kept appearing, Dr. Margaret Holloway, a psychologist who had evaluated Alice twice, once when she was 8, once when she was 10, both times at Ellen's request. Grace wrote the name down. Then she found something else. Tucked in the back of the folder, a photocopy of a second note found in Alice's room after her arrest. It wasn't evidence in the trial. It had been deemed irrelevant. But Grace read it anyway. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know what else to do. She wouldn't stop. She wouldn't listen. Please, somebody help me." It was dated 2 weeks before Ellen died. Grace's stomach twisted. This wasn't a confession. This was a cry for help. She closed the folder and sat back in the booth, staring out the window at the rain streaking down the glass. Everybody had decided Alice Whitmore was guilty. The police, the prosecutor, the jury, the media. But nobody had asked why a 12-year-old girl would write a letter begging for help and, then, 2 weeks later, kill her own mother. Grace pulled out her phone and searched for Dr. Margaret Holloway. She found an address, a small office in downtown Hartford. She grabbed her coat, left the diner, and got in her car. If Alice wouldn't talk, maybe someone else would. Dr. Margaret? Holloway's office was on the 3rd floor of an old brick building, the kind of place that smelled like dust and old coffee. A faded sign by the door read, "Child Psychology and Family Counseling." Grace knocked. No answer. She tried the handle. Locked. She was about to leave when a voice came from behind her. "She's not here." Grace turned. A woman in her 50s stood in the hallway holding a box of files. She wore a cardigan and reading glasses on a chain. "Do you know where I can find her?" Grace asked. The woman hesitated. "Dr. Holloway retired last month." "Retired? She's only 46. "I know." The woman shifted the box in her arms. It was sudden. She didn't even finish out her cases. Grace's instincts kicked in. Did something happen? The woman looked around nervously. "Who are you?" "A friend. I'm trying to help one of her patients." The woman studied her for a moment, then sighed. "Look, I don't know the details, but after that Whitmore trial, she wasn't the same. She stopped coming in, stopped returning calls. Then one day she sent an email saying she was done." Grace felt her pulse quicken. "Do you have her home address?" "I can't give that out." Grace pulled a 20 from her wallet and held it up. The woman glanced at the money, then at Grace. Finally, she scribbled something on a sticky note and handed it over. "I didn't give you this." Grace nodded. "You didn't." Dr. Holloway lived in a quiet suburb, 40 minutes outside Hartford. The house was small, well-kept, with flower pots on the porch. Grace knocked. Footsteps. A pause. Then the door cracked open. Dr. Holloway looked tired. Her hair was pulled into a messy bun. No makeup. Dark circles under her eyes. "Can I help you?" "My name is Grace Lehman. I'm looking into the Alice Whitmore case." Dr. Holloway's face went pale. "I have nothing to say." She started to close the door, but Grace put her hand up. "Please, I just need 5 minutes. I can't talk about a patient. It's confidential." "She's been sentenced to death," Grace said quietly. "Confidentiality doesn't protect her anymore, but the truth might." Dr. Holloway's hand trembled on the doorknob. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then she stepped aside. 5 minutes. Inside, the house was dim, curtains drawn, papers scattered on the coffee table. Dr. Holloway didn't offer coffee. She sat on the edge of the couch, arms crossed. "Why did you retire?" Grace asked. "That's not your business." "Was it because of Alice?" Dr. Holloway looked away. "I evaluated that child twice. Both times I told Ellen something was wrong, that Alice was scared, that she needed help. And? Ellen didn't want help. She wanted proof." "Proof of what?" Dr. Holloway's jaw tightened. "That Alice was defective." Grace felt a chill run through her. "Ellen Whitmore wasn't interested in therapy," Dr. Holloway continued. "She wanted a diagnosis. She wanted me to label her daughter, antisocial, detached, cold. But that wasn't true. No, Dr. Holloway's voice cracked. Alice was terrified. She barely spoke during our sessions, but when she did, she trailed off, shaking her head. She said her mother was testing her. Grace leaned forward. Testing her how? Dr. Holloway stood up, wringing her hands. I don't know. Alice wouldn't explain, but I reported my concerns. I filed it with the state. And? Nothing. Ellen was a respected attorney. I was just a psychologist with a hunch. She looked at Grace, eyes wet. I should have pushed harder. I should have. Her voice broke. She sat back down, burying her face in her hands. Grace gave her a moment. Then, gently, do you still have your notes? Dr. Holloway looked up, surprised. They're confidential. Alice doesn't have anyone fighting for her. You might be the only person who can help. Dr. Holloway stared at her for a long moment. Then she stood, walked to a drawer, and pulled out a folder. She handed it to Grace. If anyone asks, you didn't get this from me. Grace opened it. Inside were session notes, drawings Alice had made during therapy, and one line circled in red. Patient states, she says I'm broken. She's trying to fix me. Grace looked up. What does that mean? Dr. Holloway shook her head, her face pale. I don't know, but I think Ellen Whitmore was doing something to that child. Something no one saw. The trial had been a circus. Grace spent the next 2 days combing through news footage, articles, social media posts. Everything she could find about the case, and what she found made her sick. The media had already decided Alice was guilty before the trial even started. Headlines screamed, "Child killer shows no remorse." Talk shows debated whether a 12-year-old could be evil. Psychologists who'd never met. Alice appeared on TV, diagnosing her from a distance. One host said, "Look at her face, there's nothing there, no emotion, that's a sociopath." Another, "She planned it, locked the door, waited. That's not a child, that's a predator." The hashtag #MonsterChild trended for weeks. Photos of Alice in the courtroom were everywhere. Her blank expression, her cuffed hands, her silence. No one talked about the bruises on Ellen's wrists being small, or the timeline that didn't add up, or the note begging for help. They only talked about the other note, the one that said, "I want you dead." Grace watched a clip from the prosecution's closing argument. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Linda Marks, stood in front of the jury, holding up a photo of Ellen. This woman was a dedicated mother, a successful attorney. She gave everything to her daughter. And how did Alice repay her? She paused, turning to look at Alice. With cold-blooded murder. The camera cut to Alice. She sat perfectly still, staring at the table. Linda Marks continued, "The defense wants you to believe this was a cry for help, that Alice was scared. But scared children don't plan murders. They don't write notes days in advance. They don't lock doors and wait for their mother to drown." The jury nodded along. Grace paused the video. The defense had been weak. A public defender named Thomas Gray, overworked and underprepared. He'd barely called any witnesses, barely fought back. Grace found an interview he'd given after the verdict. The reporter asked, "Do you think Alice Whitmore is guilty?" Thomas hesitated. "I think she confessed, and when a defendant confesses, there's not much I can do." "But do you believe she did it?" He looked uncomfortable. "It doesn't matter what I believe." Grace turned off the video. It did matter, because Alice never actually confessed to killing her mother. She'd only said, because she deserved it. That wasn't the same thing. Grace pulled up another video. A press conference the day after the sentencing. Reporters swarmed the courthouse steps. One of them caught a woman coming out of the building, Mrs. Brennan, Alice's former teacher. "Mrs. Brennan, do you believe Alice is guilty?" Mrs. Brennan's face crumpled. I don't know. I just keep thinking about this one time, maybe 6 months ago. Alice stayed after class. She seemed off. I asked if everything was okay at home. What did she say? She said, "My mom says I'm part of something important." And then she left. Mrs. Brennan wiped her eyes. I didn't think anything of it. But now, the reporter pressed, "Do you think Ellen was abusing her?" "I don't know. But that little girl was scared of something." The video cut off. Grace sat back, her mind racing. Part of something important. What did that mean? She opened her laptop and started searching. Ellen Whitmore's name, her work, her history. Most of it was standard. High-profile cases, legal victories, awards. But then Grace found something buried in an old university archive, a research paper, published 12 years ago. The title, Genetic Markers of Antisocial Behavior in High IQ Children. The lead author, Dr. Simon Crane. Contributing researcher, Ellen Whitmore. Grace's blood ran cold. Ellen wasn't just a lawyer. She'd been part of a psychological research project. And Grace had a terrible feeling Alice hadn't just been her daughter. She'd been her subject. Grace needed more. She drove back to Maple Street just after midnight. The house was empty now, sealed off with police tape. The neighbors had moved on. The news vans were gone. She parked a block away and walked up quietly. Grace had done this before. Breaking into crime scenes wasn't exactly legal, but she knew how to be careful. She slipped on gloves, checked for cameras, none, and picked the back door lock in under a minute. Inside, the house was cold, dark. The furniture was still there, untouched since the investigation closed. Grace used her flashlight, sweeping it across the living room. Everything looked normal. Too normal. She moved upstairs. Alice's room was small. A bed, a desk, bookshelves lined with textbooks. Algebra, biology, psychology books for a 12-year-old. Grace opened the desk drawers, school assignments, pencils. Nothing unusual. Then she noticed something. A corner of the carpet near the closet was slightly raised. She pulled it back. Underneath was a small metal lockbox. Grace's heart pounded. She pried it open with a screwdriver from her bag. Inside, a USB drive. She pocketed it and kept searching. Ellen's room was across the hall, neat, sterile. The bed was made, no photos, no personal items. But there was a filing cabinet in the corner. Grace opened it. Legal files, client records. Nothing about Alice, at first. Then in the bottom drawer, she found a locked compartment. She forced it open. Inside were dozens of folders, each one labeled with a date and a number. Subject 12A, Session 1, Subject 12A, Session 2. Grace pulled one out. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside were notes, clinical, detached. Subject 12A exhibits low emotional response to negative stimuli. Tested with mild stressors, loud noise, isolation. No crying, no panic. Conclusion, high tolerance threshold. Grace flipped through more pages. Introduced moral dilemma scenarios. Subject 12A chose logic over empathy in 8 of 10 scenarios. Note, no distress observed. Another one. Subject has begun questioning the purpose of sessions. Recommendation, increase observation frequency. Avoid direct answers. Grace felt sick. These weren't therapy notes. These were experiment logs. Ellen had been testing her own daughter. Grace kept reading. The notes went back years, starting when Alice was 6. There were psychological assessments, IQ tests, behavioral observations, and at the bottom of the stack, a handwritten letter, addressed to someone named Dr. Simon Crane. Grace's pulse quickened. She'd seen that name before, on the research paper. The letter was short. Simon, Subject 12A, is progressing as expected. Emotional detachment increasing. Cognitive function remains high. I believe we're close to proving the hypothesis. We'll continue monitoring. Grace photographed everything with her phone. Then she grabbed the USB drive and the folders and left the house the same way she came in. Back in her car, Grace plugged the USB drive into her laptop. The screen loaded. A folder appeared. Audio recordings. Grace clicked on the first file. Static, then a voice. Ellen's voice. Session 7. Subject 12A, age 11. Today's test, moral flexibility under pressure. A pause. Then another voice. Softer, younger. Alice. Why do I have to do this? Because I need to understand how you think, sweetheart. But I don't want to. Alice, we've talked about this. You're special. You're part of something important. Don't you want to help people? A long silence. Then Alice, barely audible. Okay. Grace's stomach turned. She clicked on another file. Dated 6 months before Ellen's death. Session 104. Subject showing signs of resistance. Emotional responses increasing. Conclusion. Conditioning may be breaking down. Recommend escalation. Grace sat back, her mind racing. Ellen hadn't just been studying Alice. She'd been conditioning her, training her, trying to turn her into something. But what? And what happened when Alice started to fight back? Grace stared at the screen. The recording still playing softly in the background. Alice's voice, quiet and broken. Mom, please, I just want to be normal. Ellen's reply, cold and clinical. Normal isn't what you were made for. Grace's hands clenched into fists. Alice didn't kill her mother out of rage. She killed her to survive. Grace couldn't sleep. She spent the entire night listening to the recordings. Each one was worse than the last. Ellen's voice, always calm, always detached. Alice's, growing quieter, more afraid. By the time the sun came up, Grace felt hollow. But there was something else bothering her. Something Ellen had said in one of the recordings. Subject 12A has responded better than Subject 09B. The previous failure will not be repeated. Previous failure, Subject 09B. There had been another child. Grace opened her laptop and searched Ellen Whitmore's history. Birth records, marriage, certificates, anything. Nothing mentioned a second child. She called Marcus. He answered on the third ring, groggy. Grace, it's 6 in the morning. Did Ellen Whitmore have another daughter? Silence. Marcus, where are you getting this? Just answer the question. He sighed. There was a sister, older. Her name was Sophie. She died when Alice was 3. Grace's heart raced. How? Accidental drowning. In the bathtub. Grace froze, the same way Ellen died. Marcus, that's not a coincidence. It was ruled an accident, Grace. The kid was 5. Ellen wasn't even home when it happened. Who was? Another pause. A babysitter, some college student. She said Sophie slipped, hit her head, and drowned before she could get to her. And they believed that? There was no evidence of foul play. Grace's mind was spinning. What was the babysitter's name? I don't know. It was 15 years ago. Find out. Grace, please. Marcus exhaled. I'll see what I can do. 2 hours later, Marcus called back. Her name was Rachel Yates. She was 19 at the time, studying psychology at Yale. Where is she now? No idea. After the incident, she dropped out of school. No social media, no forwarding address. It's like she disappeared. Grace wrote the name down. Thanks, Marcus. Grace, be careful. You're digging into something that got buried for a reason. I know. She hung up. Grace spent the rest of the day searching for Rachel Yates. Nothing. No Facebook. No LinkedIn, no public records. But then she found something. An old alumni newsletter from Yale archived online. A small paragraph. Former student Rachel Yates has relocated to Vermont to pursue private counseling work. We wish her the best in her new journey. Vermont. Grace grabbed her keys. The drive took 4 hours. She stopped at a small diner in Burlington and asked around. Nobody knew a Rachel Yates, but one waitress, an older woman with kind eyes, paused when she heard the name. You mean Rachel Crane? Grace's stomach dropped. Crane? Yeah, she got married a few years back. Lives up near Stowe. Keeps to herself mostly. Grace felt the pieces clicking into place. Crane, as in Dr. Simon Crane. Do you have an address? The waitress shook her head. No, But she works at a bookstore on Main Street. Small place. You can't miss it. The bookstore was tucked between a coffee shop and a vintage clothing store. Grace walked in. The smell of old paper and coffee filled the air. Behind the counter stood a woman in her mid-30s, dark hair pulled back, glasses. She looked up when Grace entered. "Can I help you?" Grace stepped closer. "Are you Rachel Yates?" The woman's face went pale. "I go by Rachel Crane now. I need to talk to you about Sophie Whitmore." Rachel's hands trembled. She glanced toward the back room. "I don't talk about that. Sophie drowned 15 years ago. Now Ellen is dead the same way. And Alice, Ellen's other daughter, is on death row." Rachel's eyes filled with tears. "I know. Then help me." Rachel looked around the empty store. Then she locked the front door and flipped the sign to closed. She turned back to Grace, her voice shaking. "Sophie didn't slip." Grace's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" Rachel wiped her eyes. "Ellen asked me to watch her that day. She gave me instructions, specific instructions. She said Sophie needed a stress test. She told me to fill the tub and leave Sophie alone in the bathroom for 10 minutes. Grace felt sick. "And you did it?" "I was 19. I didn't know what she meant. I thought it was kind of therapy exercise." Rachel's voice cracked. "When I came back, Sophie was underwater. I pulled her out. I tried CPR, but it was too late. And Ellen, she came home. She called 911. She cried. She blamed me." Rachel's hands shook. "But I saw her face when no one else was looking. She wasn't sad. She was disappointed." Grace stared at her. "Disappointed?" Rachel nodded. "Like Sophie had failed some kind of test." Grace's mind raced. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" "I tried. But Ellen was a lawyer. She had connections. She made it look like I was negligent. She threatened to ruin me if I ever spoke up." Rachel looked down. "So I ran. I changed my name. I married Simon because he promised he'd protect me." Grace froze. "Simon Crane, your husband. He worked with Ellen." Rachel's face crumpled. "I didn't know that when I met him. By the time I found out, it was too late." Grace leaned forward. "Where is he now?" Rachel's eyes filled with fear. "I don't know. He left 3 months ago, right after Alice was arrested." Grace left the bookstore with more questions than answers. Simon Crane had disappeared. Right after Alice's arrest? That wasn't a coincidence. She drove back to Hartford, her mind racing. Ellen and Simon had worked together on a research project years ago. Sophie had died during one of Ellen's tests, and now Alice, subject 12A, was sitting in a cell, convicted of the same crime. Grace needed to find out what Project Epsilon really was. She went to the Yale University Library. It took her 3 hours of digging through archives, but she finally found it. A research proposal, dated 17 years ago. Project Epsilon, Genetic and Environmental Factors in the Development of Antisocial Behavior in High IQ Children. Principal Investigator, Dr. Simon Crane. Co-investigator, Ellen Whitmore, J.D. Grace skimmed through the proposal. It was dense, full of academic jargon, but the core idea was clear. They wanted to study whether certain children with high intelligence and low emotional response, could be trained to suppress empathy entirely. The goal, they claimed, was to understand psychopathy, to prevent it. But as Grace read further, the language shifted. They weren't just studying these children, they were creating conditions to test them. Isolation, moral dilemmas, controlled trauma. Grace felt her stomach turn. There was a section labeled Subject Selection Criteria. Subjects must be biologically related to primary investigators to ensure genetic consistency and eliminate external variables. Grace read that line 3 times. Biologically related. Ellen's daughters weren't just participants. They were the experiment. Grace kept reading. The proposal had been submitted to the University Ethics Board, and it had been rejected. Proposal denied due to ethical concerns regarding informed consent and potential psychological harm to minors. But the project didn't stop. Grace found a series of emails, buried in a separate archive folder. One from Simon to Ellen, dated 2 months after the rejection. "We don't need their approval. We'll continue independently. The data is too valuable." Ellen's response, "Agreed. Subject 09B shows promise. We'll begin phase 2 next month." Subject 09B, Sophie. Grace's hands shook as she scrolled through more emails. There were dozens, updates, data, results. And then one email that made Grace's blood run cold. From Ellen to Simon, dated the day after Sophie died. Subject 09B did not survive phase 2 testing. Cause, premature emotional override led to system failure. Recommendation, adjust parameters for subject 12A, will begin conditioning at age 6. Grace sat back, her chest tight. Sophie hadn't drowned by accident. She'd been killed by her own mother's experiment. And Alice? She'd been next in line. Grace printed everything. Every email. Every document. Every piece of evidence. Then she found one more file, a video, the file name Subject 12A, Final Assessment. Grace hesitated. Then she clicked play. The screen flickered to life. A small room, white walls, a table, 2 chairs. Alice sat in one of them. She looked about 10 years. Old. Her face was blank, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Across from her sat Ellen. Ellen's voice was calm, clinical. "Alice, I'm going to present you with a scenario. I want you to tell me what you would do." Alice nodded. "A woman is drowning. You have the ability to save her, but if you save her, someone you care about will be hurt. What do you do?" Alice stared at her mother for a long moment. Then, in a flat voice, "I let her drown." Ellen smiled. "Good. Why?" "Because caring about people makes you weak." Ellen leaned forward. "And are you weak, Alice?" Alice's face didn't change, but her voice cracked, just slightly. "No. That's right, you're not. You're special." The video ended. Grace sat in the dark library, her heart pounding. Alice hadn't been born a killer. She'd been trained to be one, and the only person who could prove it was the man who'd helped design the whole thing. Dr. Simon Crane. Grace pulled out her phone and called Marcus. "I need you to put out a search for Simon Crane. Last known address, credit card activity, anything." "Grace, what's going on?" "Ellen Whitmore didn't just die. She was stopped, and the person who stopped her might be the only one who can save Alice." Marcus was quiet then. "I'll see what I can find." Grace hung up and stared at the printed documents in front of her. She was close, but she was also running out of time. Grace didn't go home that night. She stayed in a motel outside Hartford. The documents spread across the bed. She couldn't stop reading them, couldn't stop seeing Alice's face in that video. Because caring about people makes you weak. A 10-year-old child saying that. Grace's phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "Found something. Call me." She dialed immediately. "What did you find?" Marcus's voice was, tense. "Simon Crane. He was living in Boston up until 3 months ago. Then he withdrew $20,000 in cash and disappeared. Any idea where he went?" "No, but Grace, there's something else." She waited. "There was a pediatrician, Dr. Harold Finch. He filed a report with Child Services 8 years ago. Said he suspected Ellen Whitmore was psychologically abusing her daughter." Grace's heart raced. "What happened to the report?" "It was dismissed. Lack of evidence. But Finch didn't let it go. He kept pushing, tried to get Alice removed from the home. And?" Marcus hesitated. "He died 2 weeks ago. Car accident. Ran off the road late at night, no witnesses." Grace felt ice in her veins. "That's not an accident." "Grace, you don't know that." "Yes, I do. Someone's cleaning up. Anyone who knew what Ellen was doing is being silenced. Then you need to be careful. If you're... Right, you're next." Grace didn't answer. She hung up and stared at the documents on the bed. Dr. Finch had tried to save Alice. and now he was dead. She pulled up his obituary online. The funeral had been 3 days ago, small service. No foul play suspected. But Grace knew better. She grabbed her jacket and keys. If someone was trying to bury the truth, she needed to move faster. The next morning, Grace drove to Dr. Finch's old office. It was closed now, a for lease sign in the window. She knocked anyway. No answer. But as she turned to leave, the door next to it opened. An older man with a gray beard stepped out, holding a coffee cup. "Looking for Dr. Finch?" Grace nodded. "Did you know him?" "I run the bookkeeping office next door. He was a good man. Terrible what happened." "You think it was really an accident?" The man paused, studying her. "You a reporter?" "Private. Investigator." He glanced around, then lowered his voice. "Come inside." His office was small and cluttered. He sat behind his desk and gestured for Grace to sit. Finch was paranoid the last few months. Said someone was following him. "I thought he was just stressed, but now—" He trailed off. "Did he say who?" "No, but he gave me something. Said if anything happened to him, I should give it to the police." The man opened a drawer and pulled out a sealed envelope. "They never came asking, so I kept it." He handed it to Grace. She tore it open. Inside was a handwritten note and a flash drive. The note read, "If you're reading this, I'm probably dead. Ellen Whitmore is dangerous. She's part of something bigger. I have proof. Get this to someone who will listen. H.F." Grace's hands trembled as she pocketed the flash drive. "Thank you." The man nodded. "I hope it helps that little girl. She deserves better than what she got." Grace drove to a coffee shop with free Wi-Fi. She plugged the flash drive into her laptop. A folder appeared. Alice Whitmore, medical records. Grace opened the first file. It was a physician's report from when Alice was 7. Patient presence with signs of chronic stress, elevated cortisol levels, evidence of sleep deprivation. Mother reports no concerns. Recommended follow-up, declined by parent. Another report. Age 8. Patient exhibits signs of dissociation. When asked about home life, patient becomes non-responsive. Suspected psychological trauma. CPS report filed. Grace's chest tightened. Dr. Finch had been documenting everything. She opened another file. A scanned letter addressed to the Connecticut Department of Children and Families. "I am writing to formally request an investigation into the home environment of Alice Whitmore. I have observed concerning behaviors consistent with ongoing psychological abuse. The mother, Ellen Whitmore, has refused all recommendations for therapy and has obstructed further evaluation. I believe this child is in danger." The letter was dated 6 years ago. Grace scrolled to the response. "Case reviewed. Insufficient evidence to warrant removal. Case closed." Grace slammed her laptop shut. They had failed her. Everyone had failed her. Dr. Finch had tried, and he'd been killed for it. Grace pulled out her phone and called Marcus again. "I need protection." "What?" "Dr. Finch didn't in an accident. He was murdered, and whoever did it knows I'm digging." Marcus was silent for a moment. "Where are you?" "I'm not telling you that, but I need you to trust me. Simon Crane is the key. Find him." "Grace." She hung up. She couldn't trust anyone, not fully. She gathered her things and left the coffee shop. As she walked to her car, she noticed something. A black sedan, parked across the street, engine running. Grace's instincts flared. She got in her car, started the engine, and drove. The sedan followed. Grace didn't stop driving for 2 hours. The black sedan stayed behind her for the first 30 minutes. Then it disappeared, but Grace knew better than to relax. She pulled off the highway and parked behind an old gas station. She sat there, watching the road, her heart pounding. Whoever was following her knew she was getting close. She pulled out her laptop and searched for Alice's father, the man who'd left when Alice was 3. His name was David Whitmore. Grace found a few old records, a marriage certificate, a driver's license from 15 years ago. Then nothing. He'd vanished, but Grace had a hunch. If he'd been afraid of Ellen, he wouldn't have gone far. Just far enough to disappear. She searched property records in Vermont, then New Hampshire, then Maine. And there it was, a small cabin, purchased 12 years ago under the name David Marsh. Close enough. Grace plugged the address into her GPS and drove north. The cabin was deep in the woods. No neighbors, no cell service. Grace parked at the end of a dirt road and walked the last half-mile. The cabin was small, old. Smoke rose from the chimney. She knocked. No answer. She knocked again. "Mr. Whitmore, my name is Grace Lehman. I'm investigating your daughter's case." Silence, then from inside, "Go away." "I can't. Alice is going to die if someone doesn't help her." A long pause. The door cracked open. A man stood there, mid-40s, graying beard, hollow eyes. "David Whitmore. You shouldn't have come here. I need to know what happened. Why you left." He stared at her for a moment. Then he stepped aside. "Come in, but make it quick." Inside, the cabin was sparse. A wood stove, a couch, a single chair. David sat down heavily, like the weight of the world was on his shoulders. "I loved Ellen once," he said quietly. "But she wasn't normal. I didn't see it at first. Was brilliant, driven. But there was something missing." "What do you mean?" "She didn't feel things the way other people did. She could fake it, smile, laugh, but it was all performance." He looked at Grace. "When Alice was born, I thought maybe that would change her. But it didn't." "What did she do?" David's hands trembled. "She treated Alice like a science project, even as a baby. She'd time her crying, record her reactions. She said she was tracking development, but it felt wrong." Grace leaned forward. "Did you know about Sophie?" David's face went pale. "Sophie wasn't mine. Ellen had her before we met, but I was there when she died." "What happened?" "Ellen said it was an accident, but I saw the way she looked at that little girl's body. No tears, no shock, just calculation." His voice cracked. "I confronted her. She told me I was being irrational. That grief looks different for everyone. But you didn't believe her." "No, and when I started asking questions, she threatened me. Said if I ever tried to take Alice, she'd destroy me. She had lawyers, connections. I had nothing." He looked down. "So I ran. I've been hiding ever since." Grace's heart sank. "You left Alice?" "With her. I know." His voice broke. "I know what that makes me. But I was terrified. Ellen wasn't just dangerous. She was untouchable." Grace pulled out her phone and showed him the video of Alice, the one from the experiment. David watched, tears streaming down his face. "Oh, God," he whispered. "What did she do to her? She turned her into a test subject, along with a man named Dr. Simon Crane." David's head snapped up. "Simon, you know him?" "He was at the house all the time when Alice was little. He and Ellen were always locked in her office talking. I thought they were just colleagues." He paused. "But one night I overheard them. They were talking about conditioning, about breaking down emotional responses. I didn't understand it then. Do you know where Simon is now?" David shook his head. "No, but I know he was obsessed with Ellen's work. He believed they could prove that empathy was a weakness, that it could be removed." Grace felt sick. "Alice didn't kill Ellen because she was a monster," David said quietly. "She killed her because Ellen made her believe it was the only way to survive." Grace nodded. "I know, but I need proof. I need Simon." David looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood and walked to a closet. He pulled out a cardboard box and handed it to Grace. "These are letters from Ellen. She sent them years ago, trying to get me to come back. She wanted me to be part of the study, to provide genetic data." He paused. "I kept them just in case." Grace opened the box. Inside were dozens of letters, all from Ellen, all cold, clinical. One line jumped out. Simon believes Subject 12A will succeed where 09B failed, but we need paternal baseline data for comparison. Your cooperation is required. Grace looked up. Can I take these? David nodded. If it helps Alice, take everything. Grace grabbed the box and stood. Thank you. As she reached the door, David called out. Is she going to be okay? Grace turned back. She wanted to lie, to give him hope, but she couldn't. I don't know, but I'm going to try. Grace drove back to Hartford with David's letters on the passenger seat, but her mind was elsewhere. She kept thinking about Alice, sitting in that cell, waiting to die. Grace had evidence now, proof that Ellen had been experimenting on her own daughter, proof that Alice had been conditioned, manipulated, broken down, piece by piece. But would it be enough? She needed more, something undeniable, something that would force people to see the truth. When she got back to her apartment, she spread everything out on the floor, the recordings, the emails, the letters, Dr. Finch's medical records, and then she remembered. The house on Maple Street. She'd searched Ellen's room, Alice's room, but there was one place she hadn't checked. The basement. Grace went back that night. The house was dark, still sealed with police tape. She slipped in through the back door again, moving quickly. The basement door was, in the kitchen. Locked. Grace picked it in under a minute and descended the stairs. The air was cold, damp. The smell of mildew hung heavy. At the bottom, she found a light switch and flipped it on. The basement was unfinished, concrete floors, exposed pipes. But in the corner there was a metal filing cabinet, and next to it a desk. Grace's pulse quickened. She opened the filing cabinet. Inside were more folders, more session notes, more recordings. But then she found something else. A locked drawer at the bottom of the desk. Grace forced it open. Inside was a small wooden box. She lifted. Lid. Letters. Dozens of them. All handwritten. All in the same handwriting. Alice's. Grace sat on the cold floor and began reading. The first letter was dated 2 years ago. Dear someone, I don't know who I'm writing to, but I need to write this down or I'll go crazy. My mom says I'm special. That I'm part of something important. But I don't feel special. I feel scared. She makes me do tests. She asks me questions about hurting people, about not caring. She says it's to help me, but it doesn't feel like help. I just want to be normal. I just want friends. I just want to feel like other kids. But she says that's not what I was made for. Grace's throat tightened. She read the next letter. Dear someone, I tried to tell my teacher, Mrs. Brennan, but I didn't know how to explain it. How do you tell someone your mom is turning you into a monster? I think she's trying to make me stop. Feeling things? She shows me videos of people crying and asks if I feel bad for them. When I say yes, she gets angry. She says empathy is a disease. I'm starting to believe her. Grace's hands shook as she kept reading. Letter after letter. Year after year. Alice had been screaming for help. But no one heard her. And then Grace found the last letter. It was dated 1 week before Ellen died. Dear someone, I can't do this anymore. She wants me to hurt someone. A real person. She says it's the final test. To prove I'm ready. I told her no. I cried. I begged her to stop. She said if I don't do it, she'll start over. With someone else. I don't know what that means, but I'm scared. I think the only way to stop her is to stop her myself. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Alice. Grace stared at the letter, tears streaming down her face. Alice hadn't killed Ellen out of rage. She'd killed her to protect someone else. To stop the cycle. Grace gathered the letters carefully and put them in her bag. This was it. This was the proof she needed. Alice wasn't a murderer. She was a survivor. Grace climbed the stairs and left the house, but as she stepped outside, she froze. Standing by her car was a man, tall, mid-50s, graying hair, expensive coat. He smiled at her. Ms. Lehman, I presume. Grace's blood ran cold. Who are you? The man's smile didn't waver. "My name is Dr. Simon Crane, and I think it's time we had a conversation." Grace didn't move. Simon Crane stood there, calm and composed, like he'd been waiting for her all along. "You've been very busy, Ms. Lehman," he said, asking questions, digging through files, breaking into houses. Grace's hand moved toward her phone. "I wouldn't do that," Simon said softly. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here because we want the same thing." "I doubt that." Simon tilted his head. "You want to save Alice, so do I." Grace laughed bitterly. "You helped destroy her." "No." His voice hardened. "Ellen destroyed her. I tried to stop it." Grace stared at him. "Then why did you run?" Simon sighed and looked away. "Because I was a coward." Grace's mind raced. "Who are these people?" Simon glanced around nervously. "Academics, researchers, people who funded the project privately after the university rejected it. They believed Ellen's work could revolutionize psychology. But if the truth comes out, what she did to those children, they'll all go down. Give me names." "I can't, not here, not now." He pulled a flash drive from his pocket. "But this has everything, every name, every transaction, every piece of correspondence." Grace reached for it, but Simon pulled back. "There's something you need to understand. First, Alice's confession wasn't coerced by the police, it was programmed." Grace's blood ran cold. "What?" "Ellen spent years conditioning Alice to take responsibility for failure, to internalize blame. When Ellen died, Alice's mind did exactly what it was trained to do. Accept guilt, even if she wasn't fully responsible." "Are you saying she didn't kill Ellen?" Simon hesitated. "I'm saying it's more complicated than that." Grace grabbed his arm. "Tell me, Ellen's death wasn't just murder, it was the final test. Ellen told Alice that if she couldn't complete the conditioning, someone else would be hurt. Another child. Alice believed the only way to stop it was to stop Ellen." Grace felt sick. "So Alice killed her to save someone else." "In her mind, yes, but there's more." Simon's voice dropped. "I was there that night." Grace's eyes widened. "What?" "I went to the house I was to confront Ellen, to demand she stop. But when I arrived, Ellen was already in the bathtub. Alice was standing in the doorway, frozen." "Did she do it?" Simon's face twisted with anguish. "I don't know. Ellen was still alive when I got there, struggling. I could have saved her, but I didn't." Grace stepped back, horrified. "I stood there and watched her drown," Simon whispered, "because I knew if she lived, this would never end. Alice would never be free." Grace's voice shook. "You let her die?" "Yes. And then I told Alice to call 911. I told her to say nothing, and I left." Tears streamed down his face. "I thought I was protecting her, but instead I condemned her." Grace stared at him, her mind spinning. Simon held out the flash drive. "This is everything. Names, evidence, proof of the conspiracy. Take it to the right people and you can stop this." Grace took it. "But you need to understand something," Simon said. "If you expose this, Alice's case will be reopened. They'll dig into everything, and they'll find out I was there that night." "Good," Grace said coldly. Simon nodded slowly. "I know. I deserve whatever's coming. But please save her first." He turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness. Grace stood alone in the street, holding the flash drive. She finally had the truth. But would it be enough? Grace didn't sleep that night. She sat at her kitchen table, the flash drive in front of her, and made a decision. She contacted every journalist she knew, every lawyer, every advocate who'd ever fought for a wrongful conviction. She sent them everything: the recordings, the emails, the letters, Dr. Finch's medical records, David's testimony, and Simon's evidence. Within 48 hours, the story exploded. Project Epsilon, The Secret. Experiment that destroyed a child. Alice Whitmore, victim or killer. Psychologist admits role in mother's death. The media that had once called Alice a monster now scrambled to rewrite the narrative. Public opinion shifted. Protests formed outside the courthouse. Petitions circulated online. Justice for Alice trended worldwide. Grace pushed for an emergency appeal. She brought every piece of evidence to the state's attorney. She testified. She fought. But the legal system moved slowly, too slowly. 3 weeks after Grace released the evidence, she received a call. The appeal had been denied. The judge ruled that while the new evidence was troubling, Alice's confession still stood. The sentence would be carried out as planned. Grace felt the floor drop out from under her. She'd failed. The day of Alice's execution, Grace sat in her car outside the prison. She couldn't go in. Couldn't watch, but she couldn't leave either. At 6:00 p.m., her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "It's done." Grace closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. Alice Whitmore was dead, 12 years old, convicted, executed, and the world finally understood what had been done to her. But it was too late. 1 month later, Simon Crane was arrested. He confessed to everything, to being at the house, to watching Ellen die, to leaving Alice to face the consequences alone. He was sentenced to 15 years. The researchers who'd funded Project Epsilon were exposed. Some lost their jobs. Others faced lawsuits. But none went to prison. David Whitmore came out of hiding. He gave interviews. He told the world what Ellen had done. He carried the guilt of leaving Alice behind for the rest of his life. And Grace, she kept working. She started a foundation in Alice's name, dedicated to protecting children from psychological abuse, to reforming the system that had failed her, because the truth hadn't saved Alice. But maybe, just maybe, it could save someone else. Grace stood at Alice's grave on a cold December morning. The headstone was simple. Alice Marie Whitmore, 2013-2025. She deserved better. Grace knelt down and placed a single white rose on the grave. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry I couldn't save you." The wind picked up, rustling the trees, and for a moment Grace thought she heard a voice. Soft, young, familiar. "It's okay, you tried." Grace looked up, but no one was there. Just the empty cemetery, the gray sky, the cold. She stood, wiped her eyes, and walked away. Because the work wasn't finished. Alice's story was over. But the fight for justice, that was just beginning.